Put that coffee down.
I'm not here to waste your time, okay? I certainly hope you're not here to waste mine. So I'm gonna keep this short.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
Most valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Coffee's for closers only.
Hey there, friend. Welcome back to the Behind Your Back podcast with me, Bradley Hartman, founder and president of Behind Your Back Sales Company. In this podcast, we talk about leadership, personal productivity, time management, and the craft of selling in the construction industry. And today, with our special guest, Mr. Mark Boundy, we're talking about delivering value. And that's something that, right, frankly, it's on a sign on my wall. It's a pennant on my wall, actually broken up into two pennants. One pennant says you are owed nothing. The other one says deliver value first. We talk about this a lot at the end of every single episode. We say you are owed nothing, deliver value first. Today, our guest Mark Boundy will give you more details on how to do this more consistently and how to lead others to it. But first, let's thank our sponsors, Boise Cascade. They help you move faster and build stronger. They make it easier to get more done. And our friends at Materials Exchange. They're the LBM industry's answer to E-Trade. Materials Exchange is your digital marketplace for lumber and panels. All right, so who is Mark Boundy? Well, Mark Boundy attended the University of Michigan, but unlike some other guests that attend that school, we let him slip by. He's good enough, he's smart enough to overcome that sort of impediment there. Mark has worked at some fantastic companies, including W.L. Gore, Lucent Technologies, GE Commercial Finance, and Miller Heiman, which we talk quite a bit about. If you are not familiar with Miller Heiman, if they publish it, if it's available to buy it regarding sales, you should buy it and study it. It will make you better. So we talk about that and the influence that Miller Heiman has played, both the individuals and the company in his life as it relates to value. Mark is the author of Radical Value, How to Take Your Company to the Next Level Through Radical Customer Centricity. And that's what we're talking about here today. We're breaking down value, about how you can apply it to your business and think differently about the ways that you deliver value and teach it within your own company. Radical Value is available for purchase on Amazon. I would strongly recommend it to a friend. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Mark Boundy, author of Radical Value, How to Take Your Company to the Next Level Through Radical Customer Centricity. So, Mr. Mark Boundy, welcome to the show.
Bradley, I am thrilled to be here and thrilled to connect with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough to be a guest on your show, and especially after reading your book that I will certainly quote here because I think it's absolutely fantastic. And actually, one of our taglines here on the show, it's on my wall, it's on my mug, is you are owed nothing, deliver value first. And this is what you're all about. This is what your podcast is about. This is what this conversation is about, is value. And given what's happening in the lumber building material industry, it's as apt as ever. Let's just jump in. I was really fascinated, and maybe we can start here, is that the first book beyond when I launched my company and kind of preparing for that, realizing that I have to learn how to be a salesman. And after being in purchasing for 4 years, which is the exact opposite of what a salesperson does. Everyone returns your phone call, everyone returns your emails, everyone thinks you're funny, everyone compliments your haircuts. And that is 100% opposite of what we face as salespeople. So I kind of went through the Zig Ziglar and Jeffrey Gitomer, and the first book that just blew my hair back. And I said, okay, this is how you got to think differently, a little bit more strategically, was Strategic Selling by Miller Heiman. You worked in the company, you worked with Bob Miller. What did you learn from working with him?
Oh man, I treasure my time with Bob Miller. I was a consultant. I was in the age where before you could be certified to deliver any of those courses, strategic selling, conceptual selling, LAMP, you had to go through the train the trainer event, but then you had a 90-minute call with Bob Miller. And he sent you 25 questions beforehand, and you had to answer those, and he went through them one at a time. And so you got a relationship with Bob. And so actually some of the early work on my book I shared with Bob, and he loved it. But one of the things that really always impacted me was what you're looking for in sales is something you should do in all of your life, in all of your personal relationships, and that's try to understand what the other person is thinking. Mm-hmm. It's not about what you're trying to say, it's what they heard. And one of the exercises in all of those was, tell me how you're practicing strategic selling, conceptual selling, LAMP in your personal life. What principles are you using in your personal life to really personalize and actualize this and practice it to its core because you're practicing it in your personal life?
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And what comes to mind there is when I kind of reveal some of the negotiation training that I received on the other side of the desk working for a builder. And we say, hey, how can we understand that? And how can we have some really fundamental negotiation principles? And we'll often talk about, how are you going to use this in your personal lives? And because I'm like, it's not like a switch that you can just flip when you're in business and not think like a negotiator in your personal lives. But I think to your point, selling, we're around it all the time, every day. If these aren't ingrained in your own life, they're going to be hard to call on demand in business.
Yeah. Bob, one of his famous quotes, and I think I put it in my book, is that customers do not buy your product or service. They buy their own outcomes for their own reason.
Yeah.
And one of the things he also said that kind of followed on that, you don't even know what to sell until you know what your customer is trying to buy.
Yeah.
So now that forces you to conduct your job inside the other person's head. Try to understand what's in their head. And imagine how much easier negotiation gets when you know what the other person is trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Because now you're trying to help them accomplish that, not negotiating on positions.
No, that's wonderful. And it was funny. I don't think I mentioned this to you before, but so I was reading your book and that quote was in there. They buy for their own outcomes, for their own reasons. And I was talking to a client literally an hour or so after, and something came up and I said, I just read this. I think it's apt. And I said that line and I said, why do your customers buy from you? They've been in business for 100 years, third generation. And he said, I don't know. He's like, I've never been asked that question. I've never thought about it. And I said, okay, well, I think that's worth exploring, right? And he ended up following up, talking to some of his customers. And he said what they shared back with him was some of the best marketing they've had ever, So I think on one hand, it's obvious, but obviously it's not, right?
You made my day. You're absolutely right. It's all about what the customer's trying to buy. A famous Harvard professor, Daniel Levitt, he's famous for saying customers don't buy a 1/4-inch drill, they buy a 1/4-inch hole. Well, one's the feature and one's the benefit, but neither of them are the outcomes. Let me tell you what I did with my drill. I taught my son woodworking. He made a wooden toy for my grandson, his son. And we got to sit together and watch the grandson play with a toy that he made using the skills that I taught him. That's an outcome.
Yeah.
Now, you have to, as a salesperson, imagine, you have to know that I'm married. You have to know that I have kids. You have to know that I like woodworking. And once you know that, now you can sell that outcome. Because I would pay way more for that legacy, for that memory, than I would pay for a drill. And so it's worth finding out. And so all that relationship building with the customer is learning who they are, what they're about. And it's not about the relationship, but it's about connecting what you sell to that person's life and plugging that into their life.
Well, and I think that's really well said, Mark, because we often talk about this as being a relationship business. And then all of a sudden, when we're doing all these different activities, it's easy just to say, well, I'm just building the relationship. And that's why I'm taking them to the ball game, or we're going out for golf, and I'll say, well, what's the single sales objective here? And hey, beyond the relationship, what are they trying? How are you going to connect what you can deliver to what they're truly trying to do? And I think this is a good segue. If I can, I'm sure you'd be open to this. I want to read just a little paragraph from your book that I thought really resonated with me on this idea of customer perceived value. And what in the early page you said, since value is the basis of all commerce, shouldn't we guide our companies by focusing on that basis, value? Why do we complicate business by using so many surrogates and derivatives? Customer value is easy to understand, measure, and track. Why can't we just learn how to use value as a good corporate guidepost? I'd like to ask you, and obviously you went through and detailed why that is. We ask this question all the time about what's your unique value you can bring to the customer and their outcomes. We see it week in and week out. We see companies, we see sales reps, we see sales leaders struggle to really articulate that. Why do you think that is?
There's a lot of reasons, but so many times we think we've compartmentalized jobs. The design of work, the way we design work is to take the big corporate business and divide little jobs and create organizational silos, and we create processes inside those silos, and we tell you people just get good at that process and everything will be fine. And we don't give people the connection between what that process is and what the customer is buying. And so pretty soon you get what military people call mission creep, right? Where we're going to change the process, we're going to make the process more efficient, and pretty soon the process no longer delivers that outcome to the customer. The purpose your company exists is to create more value for your customer than it costs you to deliver. No matter what business you're in, that is the purpose of your business. And now look at, if you're a CEO, if you're whatever you do in your company, look at your dashboard, look at the metrics that you track on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. And how many of those metrics, how much of that dashboard actually goes to what the customer outcome we're delivering is? Do you measure that? Yeah. No, you measure profitability or sales or turnover or inventory turns or whatever else, but we aren't measuring the value we're delivering for customers. And we're hoping that the sum of all processes delivers value, but nobody's tracking the value directly. And that's a recipe for losing sight of our customers.
Well, and you bring up a great point. As soon as I read it, I immediately had this experience of being with clients, and I will often ask different folks as we meet them, whether it's in operations or sales, just like, hey, walk me through how your daily contribution ultimately helps the customers. And I would often hear, well, we really don't view it that way. We think of it in terms of internal customers. And you early on were like, why do we have internal customers? If you can't figure out how what you do contributes to the value and the outcomes for your customers who pay you, we've got a problem. So maybe can you go a little bit on that screed about internal customers?
Yeah, I get in trouble with people when I say this because it hurts a lot of feelings.
It does.
It shakes up a lot of people.
Yes.
The internal customer is a Band-Aid for the fact that you structured your company so that people have lost sight of the real customer. And so you've given them this Band-Aid of the internal customer to make them feel like they're doing something valuable, when you could have actually shown them how their role connects to the customer. When I was at Gore, we made semi-custom products. And when I would come back from a customer call and say they need this product, it's just like we make for this customer, except with this tiny little tweak that should be relatively easy, they would stop me and say, what's the customer's business? What's the shorthand question at that company is, what's the value? But that question in that culture was, what's the company's business? How do they compete? How are we helping them compete more effectively with our product? And what is it about our product that is going to make them more money? And how do we know that we can charge at least a 20 or 30% price premium for our product versus something they could get from anybody else? How is there so much value? And he wouldn't make me a prototype until I could answer that. And it was the same for the engineer signing off. And everybody was permitted and required in that culture to know what the customer's business and how they were helping. And invariably, they would say, Mark, I got an idea for this customer. You told me this is their business. What if we did this instead of that? Would you think they'd like that? And 3 times out of 4, it was a fantastic idea that added value. So by giving everybody in the company the permission and the visibility into the customer's world, now everybody can contribute to adding value. And you add value so much more quickly to your customers.
Well, I think you used a word that I absolutely love, is just that idea of permission. And it's not enough I'll often hear it as like, oh, we have an open door policy, but everyone's like, whatever you do not take advantage of that open door policy. Or we create a culture of innovation where ideas can bubble up from anywhere. And then you realize the reality is, well, there's not a whole lot of innovation going on.
That's right. My door is always open for me to come in, for you to come in so that I can tell you what a dumb idea you just had.
Yeah. But that idea of permission and being really explicit with that is valuable. You said something important just a few minutes ago, Mark. You said, look at the dashboard and we're looking at revenue. We're looking at profitability. We're looking at margin. We're looking at turnover, both of people as well as inventory. You want me to measure value there. How can I do that? Or how can I think about that more specifically so that value can show up in a dashboard or, be more easily communicated throughout the organization?
As you go through the sales process, you're talking about outcomes, and you have some great sellers in your sales force, and you think this is just a personal style thing, but it's actually an elite selling behavior. There's some people you have in your sales force who say, that's a neat outcome. How many dollars do you think that's worth? How many dollars are you spending on that? What do you think that's worth in dollars? And your sales leader think that's a personal style thing, but no, that is the actual keys to the kingdom. As soon as you find out what those outcomes are, and you can apply a dollar sign or euro sign or whatever to that outcome.
Sure.
Now you have the ability to have negotiated price. You're negotiating price as soon as you talk about those outcomes. And if all of that information is in a place where everybody in the company can see it, now your product developers can come up with ideas that have huge value that don't cost very much.
Well, I remember this very distinctly, and I have it. It was one of the gifts that was given to me by my mentor when I launched. He gave me this book, and maybe it was like 20 pages. I believe it was from like Fox and Associates, but it was on dollarization. And that whole idea, and you go through in detail, but I also think a very easy way to apply it, because so often we'll really talk about with our clients about how do you quantify the pain. And when someone says, oh my gosh, this supplier they're absolutely killing us because of this, and they build this many number of homes, and it happens this often. Oftentimes we'll hear it and be like, great, let me send you a proposal. I was like, hey, you got to slow down and say, you mind if I do some basic back of the napkin math? And when I was on the other side of the desk, I would describe a problem, and they would ask these questions, and before you know it, they're like, all right, if you're going to build 500 houses, you got like $1 million problem on your hand. I'll be like, well, yeah, based on that math, I think you're right. And he said, so theoretically, if I could solve this for you, I don't know, in $800,000, would this be a good solution for you? I was forced to say yes. Now, right there, completely divorced any of his costs to his value. Why does this happen so rarely? Or why does this idea of dollarization, and I love the phrase you wrote, I wrote that down, is elite selling behavior. Why is this idea of dollarization and quantifying the pain, why is that an elite selling behavior versus just how we do it?
I don't know why it's so rare, because every Salesforce has some people who do it.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of their salespeople who don't feel comfortable. When I was at Miller Hyman for 9 years, it was common knowledge that the thing that people didn't do, the part of the blue sheet that people did the worst, was understanding, they call it wins and results, but it's understanding the customer outcome, the business outcomes and the personal outcomes.
Right.
And if you don't know those, you can't dollarize them. Mm-hmm. And Miller Hyman allowed people, 90% of their people to do poorly at that, their clients to do poorly at that. And we just kind of threw up our hands. That is the most important part of the blue sheet. That's where 90% of the customer buying decision gets made. And that's where the salespeople do worse. And so I can't tell you why, but I can tell you whether. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, 250 Miller Hyman consultants who probably between them had done 250,000 opportunity reviews all said overwhelmingly, regardless of the industry, regardless of the salespeople stink at this. This is what they're worst at. And it's the most important part of selling. The other thing is, maybe it is people feel like they're intrusive when they're asking the customer for their costs. And let me ask you this. I have a theory. A lot of people have agreed with it, but you're a purchasing dude, so your validation would be really important. I have this thing called the time value of selling value. that the opportunity to have those dollarization conversation is really in the very beginning of the customer's buying process. Late in the buying process, you start dollarizing it, and it's an obvious cheap negotiation ploy. But when you ask that exact same question earlier on, people are happy to share their problems and to help you expand their idea of what that impact is. So about the time that customers start asking for price concessions and we're starting to get serious on price, you're no longer able to have those questions and dollarize those things. So if you waited till the end, it's too late.
I couldn't agree more. And I had this conversation this week. So we had somebody listen to the podcast and reached out to us right in our space and said, hey, I hadn't heard of you. I bought your book and read some of the podcasts. And they said, hey, I want to get together. I want to understand how you can deliver value to us. So I sent this off to Jenny on my team and I said, hey, let's set up a call with this person. And she's like, great. She's like, obviously, it seems like they're looking for a pitch. And I said, follow up with them and say, what we're looking for is what sort of outcomes are you looking for? What are your goals? What are your challenges? What are your obstacles? Where do you want to be in 3 years? That's the conversation we're having. We started going through and he started opening up just about the specific issues he was having. We were able to dollarize those, and he's running a darn near $100 million plus business. He was describing $1 million problems. So as you know, 100% agree with that.
Yeah. I'm going to come up with another possible reason why
Sure.
people don't do that. When we first join a company and we get the product training, we're coming up to speed, and the first couple sales calls, we're barfing out what we learned in product training, not because we think the customer wants to hear it, but because we're so proud we know it and we want to share what we know. And it's not about the customer needing it. It's about us showing off what we know. And we get into that habit, and then we go to mid-career and we're asking questions that are the trigger questions that are permission to pitch, right? Oh, you said that, so here I go with this pitch.
Right.
And the discipline is when you get that permission to pitch answer, I want you to ask, tell me more. Tell me what else happens when that.
Right.
Tell me, does that cause some other problem? Tell me about that. And just hold your tongue, stop the pitch. Yeah. And the itch to pitch is a real thing. Early career, it's because we're so proud of what we know. Mid-career, it's because we want to sell what we sell, not help the customer buy the best possible thing.
Yeah. I love that, the itch to pitch. I think that's very memorable. Yeah, I'll often say is you got to be careful of PK because it leads to EGO. Like that product knowledge leads to your ego. And then it is when you say this, that opens the door and let me share with you all I know. And that's really well said. Well, on this, you hit on something I think is really important we come up against. I've had sales reps ask us at client companies so many times. They said, why either comes to goals or costs? And I'll say, hey, try to understand what their goals are. Where are they going? And see if that's a fit. Or what are their costs? Try to understand their business and ask them. These are fundamentals. Ask them. And they will say one of these versions of, who am I to ask them such private information about their goals or costs? And what I have found, and I believe, I go of one to two places. Number one, it's a confidence that leads to courage that's lacking, or it's a business acumen. I know you talk a lot about this and you have a really great chapter, and I'm not gonna look for it now, but it was something along the line of business fundamentals for non-math nerds or something like that, right? You want the finance is the language of the boardroom and where decisions are made, yet sometimes we don't even have the business acumen or the courage. How do you help your clients kind of overcome that?
It's kind of surprising because this business acumen is just my collection of a bunch of principles that are available on the public domain, but these are the ones that I learned. It seemed so natural to me, and then I kind of wrote it in the book saying, this is it. And clients say, Mark, this is where we want to start. That's going to be where we get the biggest impact for our salespeople, is getting them to be business counselors to our customers. And it's flattering, but it's kind of, don't you want to learn how to sell value? Because that's what that's what I'm really most proud of. No, we were going to get that, but we can't do that until they understand the customer's business.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to, if I can, I'm watching the time here. I wonder if we can pivot back to like this internal conversation. And I want to read another quote here because we see this often. And I think you say this so well, is when we are talking to individuals about people on their own team and how we think about internally what our contribution is. And I find myself in this situation often. You say, when an outsider asks anyone in your organization what the company is trying to accomplish and how they contribute in their role, can they answer clearly and without hesitation? If your set of guiding principles isn't simple enough to pass that test, it and they aren't guiding anything. So how might, and I think if you're listening, you're like, all right, I'm just going to pick out a random individual and I'm going to do this right now. What are you trying to accomplish and how do they contribute to that in their role? If they cannot answer that well, or they think they have low confidence that any random individual could do that well, what would be like the immediate next step? Do not pass go until you do this.
I haven't experienced this, but somebody told me that every Coke Industries company, on your first day, they sit you down in employee orientation and they give you a video of this is our business. Okay. This is what we do. This is the outcomes we deliver for our customers. And then there's a conversation about how your role connects that. Okay. So from the first moment, before you even know where the bathrooms are, they're talking to you about what the customer's outcome is. That's pretty powerful. Gore had that culture, as I told you, that everybody is required. It's part of your expectations that you're going to be asking, what's the customer's business and how are we helping them be more competitive? Mm-hmm. And it sounds really hard if you've never done it, but I've got good news for you. There's companies that do it. And so it's not impossible. It is possible. They just happen to be the elite companies. Mm-hmm. Are you willing to settle for less than elite, or is that what you want to go for?
Here, I think maybe it's the last question. If we can get one more in here. You talk about you got to be really intentional about developing sales tools to help customers feel good about the prices that they're paying. For folks that say, hey, that's a great line, right? And we want to have sales tools that make people feel happy about what they're paying. Mark, you don't understand. It's different here. What info or what sort of advice or how might you frame that to say, even today, you can help people feel good about this if you think of it in terms of value?
Your customers are only going to pay your prices, whether they're premium or low prices. They're only going to pay those prices voluntarily in the short term. Mm-hmm. So you better make them feel good about it, or you're already planting the seeds for a customer defection. So right now in the lumber industry, it's relatively straightforward conversation to talk about your increased costs of lumber and why those are happening. And luckily, the real estate housing prices are going through the roof almost as fast. So that increase of $25,000 in lumber that it costs to build the average house, well, the average house is selling for $35,000, $50,000 more than it was. Right. So yeah, Mr. Customer, I wish you could have all of that $50,000 for yourself as profit. But the reality is, here's a supply problem that is not my fault and I'm passing it along. That's actually pretty easy. But you actually gave the clue to another, the sales tools to make customers feel good about it. There was a customer that walked you through $1 million problem and said, I'm solving that for $800,000. Now, if they hadn't done that, and they said, I've got an $800,000 price premium, you would have barfed on them.
Right. Yes.
But because they have the sales skills and the sales tools and the sales conversation to create that $1 million problem with an $800,000 solution, they felt great. You're making me $200,000 more profitable with this price premium. I feel pretty darn good about that. And that's the secret. Customers don't care about your cost. You're a purchasing guy. If a customer came to you and said, hey, I got to charge you more because my cost went up, how many seconds would it take you to say, your costs are not my problem? Your costs aren't their problem. It better have some value. You have to be able to tell them, here's the value and here's why you're better off. Or it's a short-term solution.
Yeah. Well, and I think this just really goes to, there's been so many good little takeaways on my notes that I've been taking over here. But I think if you're listening to this, whether you're a sales leader or you're a sales rep, or anyone in the organization, it is to really think about where you position those questions about business outcomes and to dollarize and quantify that pain. You're so right by saying if you leave that till later, you're not going to be able to do it, because then it looks like, oh, yeah, well, here we are, Mark, we're negotiating. I better come up with some plausible reason of the cost. It's too late. So to do that early is so critical.
And it takes the business acumen and your understanding of their business so that you can walk the customer through their own business.
Yeah.
Remember, your customer is really siloed and really compartmentalized. So the person you're talking to doesn't know their business well enough to be naturally able to do this math themselves. But you can walk them through it and they will buy into it very quickly. They know their business well enough to be guided through it. They just don't know their business well enough to do it unguided.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure a couple things we do before we go. Number one, we got to give a shout out to Mr. Tim Rethlake. He's been a great friend of the show, great friend of mine. He's the one who bought your book and was like, Hartman, you got to connect with Mark. And that was, he was 100% right. Two, I will tell you, your book, Radical Value, I would firmly recommend anyone buy it and read the entire, 215 pages. I would also say, if you could buy these for every person in your organization and just dwell and simmer in the first 50 to 75 pages, I firmly believe it can transform your relationship with value. I firmly believe that. So I want to make sure folks can learn, Mark, a little bit more about your book, Radical Value, also about your podcast, and maybe where they can find more information about you.
Yeah. In the beginning of the book, I actually say, depending on your role, if you're a salesperson, here's the chapters you should read. Here's the chapters you should skim. If you're a business leader, here's the ones you should read. Here's the ones you should skim. So there's actually a reader's guide for you to do that. It's available, Radical Value, Mark Boundy. Just search that on Amazon. I'm on the big A, and it's available in hard copy and Kindle.
I've recommended your books to a ton. You can see it's dog-eared, it's highlighted all over the place.
Complimented it, all those sticky notes hanging out of that.
Right. Well, absolutely. So, hey, appreciate for all the work you do. You've certainly made me smarter, and I appreciate you making time to come on the show. Thank you.
Bradley, thanks for having me. It's been a real treat.
Well, as always, thank you for listening. I hope you found my conversation with Mark Boundy to be worth your time and attention. Our goal here is to make this the best podcast you'll listen to. I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas for future shows, or for potential guests, and any issues that you are struggling with your customers. I want to know, I want to help you. Feel free to email me directly at bradley@behindyourbacksales.com. Again, bradley@behindyourbacksales.com. You can also link up with me on LinkedIn and connect with me on Instagram at behindyourbackceo. And if you found this episode with Mark Boundy to be valuable, please share it with your network and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Those mean more to us than you know. I want to thank our sponsors. You can learn more about Boise Cascade's engineered wood products and their innovative, that's right, go with the British version of innovative today, innovative sawtech technology by visiting bc.com/EWP. And what E-Trade is for the stock market, Materials Exchange is to the LBM industry. They make commodity pricing transparent, buying simple, and the fees are low. So we're going to close out with our own leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.